Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a good Wednesday. I thought that for today I would talk a little bit about the menstrual cycle. Now, this is something not super exciting, but incredibly important when we talk about reproductive endocrinology and kind of how sex hormones work and how that plays into a bunch of the symptoms that we see kind of in a gynecologic endocrinology practice. Now, it's amazing to me, I've had patients come in that have no idea anything about the menstrual cycle. I've had patients come in that have completely erroneous ideas about it. So I just thought it would be a good idea to kind of get things straight. Obviously, I'm going to put a kind of more condensed version of this video on, Facebook and Instagram. So if you are seeing this from that link, great. This kind of expands upon it. And if not, then you can go check that out too if you want. So to start off, we're going to use kind of a couple of conventions. And the first is that we're going to say that from the first day of a period to all the way to the first day of the subsequent period is around 28 days. And so that's kind of a lunar cycle there. It makes the math really easy to do. And we're going to say that in the middle, on roughly day 14, ovulation occurs. And ovulation is when the ovary releases an egg from the dominant follicle that's been there. Now we kind of divide those halves. You can kind of classify them either by what's going on with the uterus and say it's proliferative or secretory. Or you can say what's going on kind of with the ovary and call it follicular or luteal. And those are the different phases. I like the ovarian one because I think, the follicle it occurs before ovulation and that F is like first. And then the luteal occurs after ovulation. That L is like last. So I think it's easier for me. Follicular phase, basically, from an ovarian standpoint, is where we start to see that follicle grow and grow and grow until it reaches a certain point, and then ovulation occurs, it ruptures, egg is released. And then what's left over after ovulation on that follicle is a kind of a newer type of cyst called a corpus luteum. And that's Latin for yellow body. And the corpus luteum kind of secretes some different hormones on its own to help potentially maintain a growing pregnancy. Now, the corpus luteum has roughly a lifespan of around 14 days. And so we can say, well, if ovulation occurs, we know then it should be roughly 2 weeks before, a period starts. Now, the follicular phase can last an indeterminate amount of time. It can be something that occurs for 1 week. It can be something that occurs over, months at a time. And this kind of explains the variation between cycle lengths from woman to woman. Now, the hormones that are at play here, there are 4 kind of main hormones that we want to talk about. 2 that come from the ovary, and that would be estradiol and progesterone, and 2 that come out of the brain, and that would be follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Now, so from the beginning, if we start kind of on day 1, which is the first day of the period there, what we start to see is a rise in the gonadotropin, or a hormone that tells your gonads kind of how to grow, if you will, follicle-stimulating hormone. And as FSH starts to kind of go up, kind of following behind it is estradiol. So you kind of get these big kind of, curves like this in the menstrual cycle. So you have a rise in FSH, and then you start to see kind of a rise in estradiol, because what FSH is doing, it's stimulating the development of follicles in the ovaries, and all those little follicles are releasing estradiol on their own. Now, it's going to get to a certain point in which that estradiol level is high enough to kind of shut off the FSH. So you see that FSH then starts to decline. Now, once estradiol reaches a certain point, you actually see the rise in what's called luteinizing hormone, which is another gonadotropin coming out of your brain. And luteinizing hormone's main purpose in terms of the menstrual cycle is to cause ovulation. You get kind of a peak of LH and then it falls. And when it hits that peak, that's what causes the follicle to rupture, basically, and for ovulation to occur. Now, also, luteinizing hormone also helps the ovaries secrete testosterone, too. And so as it gets to a certain point, we see a rise in testosterone as well. And this explains why, as women get closer to ovulation, they typically have an increase in their sex drive to help with reproduction. So this all is on what's called a negative feedback system, basically. So, one hormone gets to a certain point, in which case, it's causing stimulation of another hormone. And when that kind of stimulation hormone reaches a certain point, it shuts off the stimulating hormone. So in the case of FSH and estradiol, FSH goes up, estradiol gets to a certain point, shuts off FSH. As estradiol goes up, it causes LH to go up, reaches a certain point, and estradiol levels start to decline. And that's when then you start to see that LH surge, bloop, and then it causes ovulation, and the, ovary says, here you go, egg, get on out of here. Now, so that basically describes the follicular phase of the cycle in the first portion. Now, after ovulation occurs, we're in the luteal phase because things are controlled by the corpus luteum. Now, from a purely reproductive standpoint, what's going on is that egg has been released, hopefully sperm is meeting it, and we're going to have, reproduction occurring. And so what we see then is after that egg is released, we start to see a very incredible rise in progesterone. Now, progesterone in the follicular phase, with the first part of the menstrual cycle, has been relatively non-existent. And so if you draw hormone levels and you have a woman who's in her, follicular phase, her progesterone may be, almost undetectable, less than 1. That's very, very normal. That's not an abnormal finding. But after ovulation, you should start to see that kind of go up quite impressively. Also, while estradiol does drop some after ovulation, it also has a secondary hump too, if you will. And what it's doing, estradiol and progesterone are working in tandem to prepare the lining of the uterus for implantation from an embryo. So remember, now an egg has been released, hopefully sperm is meeting it. They're going through all that cellular reproduction and division and all those things, and that embryo then will implant now in a very rich, fluffy endometrium that has really good blood supply that can help sustain the pregnancy. Now, if pregnancy does not occur, then what we start to see is as that 14-day window closes, those hormone levels start to decline. Estradiol and progesterone start to go down because that corpus luteum can only last by itself for about 14 days. If pregnancy does occur, then HCG, or human chorionic gonadotropin, which is our pregnancy hormone, comes back and rescues that corpus luteum and allows it to continue to produce progesterone for much longer. But if pregnancy does not occur, then you see a decline in estradiol and progesterone, and that's what actually triggers the start of your period once they get to a certain level, because that now fluffy endometrial lining doesn't have the hormonal support, so it sheds off and you bleed. So basically that is the the menstrual cycle in a very quick, condensed version. The first portion, the follicular phase, is very hormonally active in terms of hormones coming out of your brain and causing stimulation on your ovary. After your ovary releases the egg, we're really just dealing with progesterone and, estradiol. Testosterone, like I said, really has that peak before ovulation, or with ovulation, if you will. It goes down after that because obviously LH levels are going down too. So, if we look at this explains a lot of different things. Ladies that have perimenstrual mood disorders, well, as that estradiol and progesterone is dropping, there are those, estrogen centers in your brain that are very, necessary for mood and cognitive function. They're getting depleted of those hormones. So you start to see those aberrant sensations. A lot of the fluid retention and things like that we see close to your period. Well, progesterone, when it's in high amount, actually can act as a diuretic. And so, or push fluid off. So as that declines, you get more water retention. It all can be explained. So anyway, I hope that you understood this. I hope this was a good way to look at things and gives you at least a basic idea about what's going on with the menstrual cycle. Obviously, if you have any questions, please let me know. But I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.